Have you ever heard the saying that you get exactly what you expect? Well, it turns out that that's more true than we really think. I'd like to talk today about expectations and the lifelong effect that it has on every one of us. Robert Rosenthal is a social scientist now working at Harvard, who had discovered that he had influenced the results of an experiment he was conducting and decided to test the experimenter's expectations' influence on outcome. To this end, he designed an experiment wherein he tested experimenters' expectations on rats. So what he did was this. He had two groups of rats. One group he told the experimenters were purposely bred to be maize bright. The second group of rats were told that they were purposely bred to be maize dull. The results were that those rats, believed capable of superior performance, actually performed far better than the dull group. In 1965, he was invited by an elementary school principal to test this effect on the student-teacher relationship. In this test, teachers were told that a certain few students in their classes were destined to bloom intellectually that year. They were tested before the school year, and they were tested after. They were randomly selected, but chosen to be all things equal, as it were. So they didn't randomly take a bunch of students who actually were intellectually superior. So they tried to get a really good sample when they assigned the students randomly. And those students actually did do better at the end of the year. Not only that, they continued to do better throughout their life. Although if they had too many negative expectations put on them, people who didn't think they were capable of learning, math and science with females tends to change. When they start off younger and in the elementary years, they often excel in science and math, but somewhere around 6th grade, they start to get the message that math isn't for them. And they don't do so well compared to boys anymore. By the time they get to high school, they don't choose math and science classes to take as electives. So the way that they were being influenced, they found through videotaping and watching the student-teacher interactions, was that the teachers that thought that student was going to excel intellectually would devote more time to them. Give them just a few more seconds to answer the question. Call on them more often to give them an opportunity to prove what they've learned and to learn. As it turns out, they would often give them more enhanced learning assignments. They would give them more smiles and nods. Their feedback was more encouraging rather than discouraging, and they tended to use the environment to make a more comfortable atmosphere for them. So in addition to the smiles and nods and positive feedback, they also included a closeness of body language and of personal boundaries in space. So they would often get close and maybe pat them on the back a little bit, or they definitely got closer to those students physically than those that they thought were not showing potential or were essentially a waste of their time. Over the decades since, the experiment has been repeated and altered to examine the effect in other areas of life. At last count, according to Rosenthal's website, or Rosenthal's report, was like 460 or something like that, different evaluations can be applied in different areas to see how this effect affects our daily lives in myriad of areas, from marketing, decision-making, and shopping is a very big one. The workplace, military, training of personnel, the attitude that the leaders take in military, if they believe that their new recruits have tested really well in proficiencies, they're going to treat them like they're, exceptional soldiers, and they will end up being exceptional soldiers. Parenting, medicine, coaching, teaching, and the workforce are all shown to have a strong expectancy effect. So what is this effect? Well, the one I really want to focus on, I think the one that I found the most concentration on across the most fields and throughout the lifespan, is the Pygmalion effect, which is the phenomenon whereby one person's expectation for another person's behavior comes to serve as a self-fulfilling prophecy. We all know self-fulfilling prophecies. If we believe that we're going to be bored throughout an event, we're likely going to be bored throughout the event. But we don't often blame ourselves and our attitude about it, our expectation of the event, on our bad time. We don't sit there and turn it back and say, you know what, that was my own expectations. If I had went in saying, you know what, this is an experience. I may be bored, I may not be. We'll find out. That would have given the person a more objective evaluation of the event, but how they experienced it was based on their expectation of being bored. And we see this a lot with children, right? I'm bored. There won't be anything to do. I don't want to go. Which, of course, affects everybody's experience because now everybody's expecting the child to have a bad time, and they're expecting that to influence how good of a time everybody else has. And you can often destroy a moment before it even begins. So that's one that affects very different things in different ways. So one way is in parenting. There was an article, one of my most passionate arguments and debates that I have had for a very long time was that sugar makes kids hyper. I have a problem with that because biologically I know how the body breaks down foods and how it uses sugar. So I have a real problem with somebody saying, well, your body discerns that they got that from cake rather than from pasta. Sugar is sugar. The body doesn't discriminate. So the science just doesn't support the hypothesis that sugar makes kids hyper. And it has bothered me forever because every time a parent declares that sugar will make their kid hyper, so help me, you give that kid sugar and they will bounce off the walls. And this has driven me up a wall because if I remove the parent from the situation, I never have the issue with the behavior. And they refuse to accept it. But it turns out that there's quite a bit of research out there that has completely debunked the does sugar make kids hyper question, and has settled it since the 90s, actually. So I'm kind of surprised that it's so pervasive in our culture today to think this, to expect that behavior from our children the moment they have cake or ice cream, at a birthday party, no less. So, an article called Does Sugar Make Kids Hyper? Dan Engber persuasively argues, only if you believe it does. So research conducted on the link between sugar intake and behavior problems in the early 1990s by Richard Milich and Daniel Hoover found that the link between sugar and behavior might be based on parents' expectations, not on the sweetener itself. That's a direct quote. In 1995, Vanderbilt University pediatrician Mark, I hope I'm saying this right, Walraish found no evidence for the belief that sugar impacts a kid's behavior or cognition. We came as close to proving the null hypothesis as you can, says Walraish. My high school orientation, there was one segment only that the high schoolers talked about for like the 4 years we were there. And that was that moment where they told you about the dropout rate. And they said, look to the person on your left. Look to the person on your right. Look to the person in front of you. One of you four will drop out of high school. So I want to talk about a thing called the Jastrow effect of expectancy. Rosenthal and Jacobson in 1968 reported a different striking effect on workers being trained on the then new IBM Hollerich punch card machines. So what happened was the first group was told by the inventor of the machines that they could produce 550 per day. And that's what the workers produced. And they had a really hard time beating that. It stayed pretty much right around that 550. They had a really hard time beating that statistic, that number, that outcome. But the second group was isolated from the first group and from the inventor, and they weren't told how much they could produce. So turns out that they soon were doing 2,100 per day, from 550 to 2,100 per day, just by removing the statistics of expectation. So I go back to my high school orientation now, and I think at the time, the dropout rate was 25%, and I wish I had taken down the source. I think it was Child's Trends or something. Until recently, like 2004, 2005, something like that, the national dropout rate was still 25%. And I have to wonder, did they stop harping on the dropout rate? Did they stop focusing on that? Was that the change? Instead of focusing on the negative and expecting so many people to drop out, like that's an option. Well, so many people fail, that's an option, 25% of you. As a matter of fact, look around. These people that you know, that you're sitting around your peers, they're going to drop out. It's no big deal. But you're horrible if you do. But it's an option. It's sort of mixed messages. And I think that the kids get a lot of mixed messages about expectations that do end up forming the basis of their reality. One documentary that came to mind was the Baraka School documentary. It's a school that takes place in Kenya, and they select like 20 at-risk students from Baltimore to educate in Kenya. And it's an educational opportunity. So the thing that bothered me was the way that it was pitched to the students and to the families. But I took a segment out of the beginning, and this is at the very beginning of the documentary. Miss Jackson is talking to the students, and she says, "This is something I want you all to think about. As young men in Baltimore City, most of you have about 3 choices, okay? 3 things that might happen to you by the time you turn 18. Jail," she motions about and mentions pretty handcuffs and kind of goes into some elaborate detail. "Death," she talks about the suit and the coffin that you're going to go into, some elaborate detail. "Or diploma." And then she kind of skirts right into the next line. And she says that she's often asked, and she just wanted to assure the students, who are all about 12 years old, she wants to assure them that this is not a school for bad children, a boot camp, or jail. Yet in the next sentence, she says that they are looking for, quote, "young men who are interested in changing their behavior and attitude." This speaks volumes about the Baraka School's actual mission statement. She then asks, "How many of you have been suspended?" Looking around at the raised hand, she launches into her next practiced line. It really does look practiced, trust me. It looks like a sales pitch that she has practiced and probably very proud of. So she looks around at the raised hands, and she delivers the definition of their futures for them. She says, "All of you aren't going to graduate." Why? Why does she have to? These things make me mad. Stop defining how their experience is going to play out, how their life is going to play out. It bothers me. So then I think back, and I think about all those statistics that we have about dropout rates, about success rates, about grades and IQs, and all of these expectations for performance. Athletics, how the coaches can influence somebody, whether they're a bad player or a good player, actually depends on the expectations about their capabilities to perform. If you don't expect them to be able to be as good, you're not going to treat them as good, you're not going to encourage them as good, you're not going to give them those small nonverbal reinforcements that tell them that they can achieve. There's bad coaches and there's good coaches, and I think that when we look at that with this perspective, we can kind of see where the difference truly lies. So that's high school, for me anyway. Educators. Educators are one of the top studied when it comes to expectancy effect. And I think that's probably because they already have students that are testing. So you can readily test what's happening. They already have previous tests. They are just so instrumental in influencing young children. And they have such longevity of influence throughout our lifespan. The beginning of our formative years, everything is spent so many hours with educators that their influence is bound to have a great influence on our outcome. Expectations matter. And Ruby Davies, who came across Rosenthal's work and fell in love with it, started to run workshops for teachers on the power of high expectations and the methods used by high expectation teachers. And this is in New Zealand. And she videotapes the instructors while they interact with students so that they can review their own behavior and interactions with the students in order to get some better feedback, more productive, effective feedback. And Ruby Davies said that I've watched teacher after teacher saying things like, "Oh my God, just look at me. I had no idea I was raising my eyebrow or shaking my head like that." We do. We raise our eyebrow. We shake our head. We grimace. We give looks of disgust. We do these things in minute ways that convey what we think about a person's abilities, what we think of them, what we think of their value. And they eventually self-value by our expectations and our evaluations. I think that Ruby Davies' work with feedback video is absolutely fabulous. I don't think that we're capable really, until we're aware, of monitoring those gestures, those nonverbal leakages, as Rosenthal calls them. An overt example of the effect, I think, is Jane Elliott's 1970s Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes exercise on discrimination, which illustrated the effect on academic success based on an expectation according to eye color. Our expectations of minorities is very much a hot topic in today's society, and especially in regards to education and justice. And that brings me to the last area that this really affects people throughout the lifespan, is stigma in the law. Jails and prisons are disproportionately filled with minorities. Police target and treat minority and low-income populations differently. The Department of Justice, in a study of police abuse of authority, found that expectations regarding acceptable behavior of the police are influenced from the chief down to the newest recruit. So if it's believed that it's acceptable to use excessive force, that it will be excused and people will turn a blind eye, then it's more likely to happen in the police station. Whereas if the chief himself believes that that is a rare instance that requires any sort of force, and that interpersonal skills is the way to accomplish things, to not take offense, to not think that it is your right to be treated with respect, and for people to jump to obey everything that you say, and to arrest them if they say, "But I know my rights." This happens. We've all seen the YouTube videos. We've all read the reports. It goes viral almost monthly. But the influence that these people have on our behavior, on our reality, is shaped by the expectations that we perceive, that they imply in many subtle, non-spoken ways. I think Jane Elliott shows just how effective it can be of a force, because it doesn't even have to be subtle. You can say, I am going to alter your behavior by telling you that brown-eyed people are more dumb than blue-eyed people. And tomorrow I'm going to flip it around, and I'm going to just randomly tell you blue-eyed people are more stupid than brown-eyed people. And it's going to have an effect, a tangible, a measurable effect on your life's ability. That's messed up. But think about how much more messed up it is when parents say that they can't take their child grocery shopping because they won't behave. Lo and behold, they can't take their child grocery shopping, and their child will absolutely not behave for them. There's many ways that we influence the behavior of others. But when it comes to children, they are the most vulnerable members of our society, and we need to take care when we define who they are and what they're capable of. Girls are capable of doing math, they're capable of doing science, they're capable of being just as athletic as boys. Boys are capable of being emotional, of being sensitive and compassionate, of not excelling at sports, but rather like to curl up with with a good book. Having expectations about who we should be, who we are, how well we will do at a certain thing, and how we should be treated by those with authority over us. These are the things that we need to be aware of. It's those subtle things. I mean, granted, we need to be aware of Jane Elliott's work. We really do, because it shows that we are affected even when we're well aware. We need to recognize the effect that expectations have on us throughout our lives. We don't get over that. When we go to the doctor and he says, I expect this treatment regimen to work really well and you should see results within 3 days at the most. You can guarantee that most of the people are going to see 3 days. Within 3 days, they're going to have they're fine. We can extend that by saying, well, there might be something worse going on here, and maybe we should take some tests. Maybe you're scared about getting sued, or maybe your practice needs some more money and you're getting a kickback from a particular pharmacy rep. So you're going to prescribe this and make it sound like he needs to have a longer treatment course than, you don't know, it certainly won't hurt. Except it does. It's got a nocebo effect. The person thinks that they're sicker than they really are. And so they become sicker than they really are. So the way we present information shows what we expect of their behavior. So let's go back to the rats. How did those experimenters trick rats into catching on to what they expected of them? That's a really good question. That is a very good question. And I think that how people get us to respond is probably the best question that I've asked all year. Thank you for your time.